All right. Hi, everyone. So a little bit about Maria. She is a brand strategist, author, and speaker who believes cash flow and creativity are not mutually exclusive. As brand chief strategist and creator of Red Slice, she advises startups, solopreneurs, and small mid-sized growth companies on how to craft irresistible brands. Maria is the author of 2 books, Branding Basics for Small Business and what we're going to look into today, her humorous and heartfelt memoir, Rebooting My Brain. So Maria has been also featured on MSNBC, ABC News, NPR, and Entrepreneur, and the LA Times. We often don't get to hear a lot about severe brain trauma patients because, sadly, they don't always have the means of or cognitive ability to communicate their experience. Maria has had an amazing recovery from a ruptured brain aneurysm just over 4 years ago. She now uses her voice to educate and inspire others about both the unseen effects of brain injury as well as how to bounce back after any crisis yanks you out of your life. So please let me welcome and join me to welcome Maria Ross. Thank you.
Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. As Rachel said, my name is Maria Ross, and I want to talk to you a little bit. Kind of my mission is twofold in talking to you today. Number one is to educate you a little bit about brain injury and brain aneurysms in particular. As we all know from all the quarterbacks that got concussions this past weekend in the NFL, brain injury is finally getting in the spotlight, and so more people need to understand some of the unseen effects that go along with it, because too often people try to diagnose it as, oh, they look fine. And so I'm really on a mission to educate people about what brain injury patients, no matter how they got their brain injury, whether it's concussion or, like me, an aneurysm or a stroke or some other traumatic event, many of the effects are the same. So I'm on a mission to educate as well as inspire people, because my story is probably where I was in my life is probably very similar to where you guys are. And, when life yanks you out of it because of a crisis, it can really make you lose your balance. And so it's all about how do you get back into the slipstream of your life and rebuild, hopefully a little bit wiser and a little bit changed by the experience. So let me paint a picture for you of what was going on when this whole aneurysm hit my life and the life of my husband, Paul. In 2007, we had been living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had been here for almost 8 years, both living similar lives to what you guys are living. We were both marketing professionals, marketing executives in technology, working down in the valley, living up in San Francisco, so commuting, really fast-paced lifestyle, really doing a lot and trying to fit a lot in. My husband got a job offer from Microsoft, so we ended up moving to Seattle because of that. And you can imagine that was a huge change. Not only did we move to a new city, but we had to make new friends. We bought our first house. We adopted our first dog. And as if that wasn't enough change and stress, I decided, after my company that I was working for in the Valley had some layoffs, I decided to hang out my own shingle and start my brand consultancy, which I'd wanted to for a long time. So I was getting into the swing of owning a new business and all the legal requirements and the accounting requirements and networking and trying to build up that base of clients. So it was a really crazy and stressful time for us, and we were going at probably about 300 miles an hour, as I'm sure many of our lives feel like in this day and age. In addition to all of that, as if, again, that all wasn't enough, I'm also an actress in my spare time, so I was investigating the Seattle theater scene as well, thinking I'm not sure how I was going to have time to do another play on top of all of this. So it was a pretty crazy time, and after an initial episode, which maybe we can talk about in the Q&A if you want, I started having some pretty debilitating migraines on a regular basis, to the point that I was vomiting, I couldn't go into work, and there was one particular episode that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And when I went to the doctor, he thought it was just all the stress and change that was going on in our lives. And my blood pressure was through the roof when he took it. But there's a high blood pressure in my family, so we really weren't surprised that all the stress and change had caused the high blood pressure. So fast forward about a month and a half of the occasional dealing with these headaches, monitoring my blood pressure. Maybe, he said to monitor it for a month, and if it wasn't going down, to come back in. I was about to get ready to make that call to go back in to see him, but on August 4th, 2008, I collapsed unconscious on my bathroom floor. And luckily, my husband decided to leave work early that day and come home and work from home because I wasn't feeling well. So had he not been there, I probably wouldn't be here today. But he immediately called 911, and we also were very fortunate enough to live about 5 miles from the region's top trauma center that attracts some of the top neurosurgeons in the country. So that was another sort of stroke of luck or destiny that was kind of on my side that day. And when they rushed me to the ER, unconscious and unresponsive, they did an emergency scan and found that an aneurysm had ruptured and it was causing a hemorrhage. So before we go any further, I just want to kind of clarify a few definitions. How many of you know what an aneurysm is? Anyone? Yeah, I didn't know what it was either. So I always thought an aneurysm was an event, like a heart attack, like someone has an aneurysm. But an aneurysm is actually a thing. It's a ballooning of a weak spot in your artery wall or your blood vessel. And it's when it ruptures, it can either get so big that it causes problems, or like in my case, it can rupture because of all the pressure of your blood pumping through the vessels. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger until, like a balloon, it actually pops. So I wanted to read some statistics to you about brain aneurysm because a lot of people don't know a lot about it. An estimated 6 million people in the US have an unruptured aneurysm but don't know it. That's about 1 in 50 people. So you can actually have an aneurysm and live your life and be fine, and it may never cause you any problems. In fact, I actually have another aneurysm that's really small, but because of what happened to me, it's being monitored by the doctors. The rate of rupture is approximately 8 per 100,000 people, or 25,000 people. And about 40% of all people who have a ruptured brain aneurysm will die as a result. 4 out of 7 people who actually survive will have disabilities. And shockingly enough, the most prevalence of brain aneurysms is in people between the ages of 35 and 60. So I had my aneurysm burst when I was 35, and everyone thought, oh, that's so young, but it's actually right in the beginning of that sweet spot. And for some reason that science hasn't quite figured out yet, women suffer more than men from brain aneurysms at a ratio of about 3 to 2. And brain aneurysm ruptures are 3 to 5% of all new strokes. So it's pretty compelling when you look at the statistics that someone somewhere may be touched in their lives, either themselves or someone close to them, by a ruptured brain aneurysm. And I've heard so many stories from emails since I've gotten the book about all different kinds of scenarios where people discovered their aneurysm or had it rupture and didn't know, or had misdiagnosis upon misdiagnosis from doctors. So a lot of the nonprofit groups that are out there really seek to not just educate the public, but educate primary care physicians, because many of them don't, like mine, know that those are the common symptoms of an unruptured aneurysm. So back to the ER. They also discovered that when I had this ruptured aneurysm, obviously when it ruptures, it causes a cerebral hemorrhage, and that's really where the danger is. In my case, the specific hemorrhage that I had was called a subarachnoid hemorrhage, and it doesn't have anything to do with spiders. But as one doctor explained to me in a great way, he said, it's really just not your brain and your skull. There's a bunch of layers that protect your brain, sort of like saran wrap, that you don't really know the technical terms for. And between 2 of those layers is a space called the subarachnoid space. And what makes that hemorrhage really dangerous is that it's not localized. So once it gets into the subarachnoid space, it actually surrounds the circumference of your brain and causes pressure, which is what is really deadly in most cases. So that is about, the subarachnoid hemorrhage is about 1 to 7% of all new strokes. And the statistics around that is about 50% of the people who have those don't survive. About 10 to 15% of them never even make it to the hospital in time. And of those that survive, they often have neurological or cognitive impairments. So it was pretty nasty, and I'm very blessed and very lucky, and I've actually surprised many of my neurosurgeons with my recovery, because I really sort of beat the statistics with what's happening to me. But to get back to the story, so I was in the hospital in summary around 6 weeks total. I was in the ICU for about 3 or 4 weeks between ICU and the neurosurgery ward. What they did was initially they have to stop the bleeding. That's the imperative the day that I was brought in. And there's 2 ways to stop an aneurysm. One way is clipping, which is literally you go in and you surgically almost like put a clothespin and close off the aneurysm. The other way, depending on where it's located and how big it is to do a coiling, which is what they did with me. They did an emergency coiling procedure, which is pretty crazy. So they go through an artery in your thigh, and they put a catheter that goes all the way up to your brain, and they thread platinum wires one by one and basically create like a knitted ball to block the flow of the blood in the aneurysm. So it's basically like I have a plug that's stopping the flow of the blood from the aneurysm. So that kind of blows my mind. Not, pardon the pun, but so that's what they did with me. And then as a result, I had a couple of other setbacks while I was in ICU and neurosurgery. I had what's called an angioplasty, because a common side effect from brain trauma is a few days later, like clockwork, what happens is your brain is trying to protect itself from the trauma. So some of your blood vessels snap shut without warning, and that can cause stroke-like symptoms. So for me, it was a degradation of my left side just about the third or fourth day that I was in ICU, and they realized I needed an angioplasty, and that's just basically when they go in with a balloon and pump up and prop up the blood vessel again so that it's not snapped shut anymore. I also had an issue with an increase of intracranial fluid, or ICF, which again is common with brain trauma. What happens is our bodies all produce ICF on a regular basis, and in a normal healthy body, it's absorbed back into the bloodstream in a routine way. But when you have a brain trauma, sometimes the body can't absorb the fluid as fast as it's being produced, and so it causes excess pressure on your brain. So they did several spinal taps on me, but it still wasn't alleviating the pressure, so I had to get a shunt implanted in my skull, which is still there. And that's just sort of like a release valve, that when the fluid built up too high, it would release the fluid. There's actually a tube that goes down the back of my ear and down my chest into my abdominal area. Now, it's probably not working now because this was over 4 years ago, but it's too invasive to go back in and remove it. So I just sort of have this shunt in my head for the rest of my life. And then in addition, I did a lot of a couple weeks of inpatient therapy while I was in the hospital, because I also forgot to mention I was blind the entire time that I was in the hospital. I had what's called Terson syndrome, which is a side effect of a subarachnoid hemorrhage, because the hits just keep on going. And it basically caused another hemorrhage in my retinas that impaired my vision. So I had no short-term memory. I was on ICU drugs and totally confused and rambling and making up stories and conspiracy theories. And then on top of that, I couldn't see. So that was my experience in the hospital. I got released, and then a week later, the eye doctors did a surgery on one of my eyes to at least clear the vision so that I could rehab. But they don't like to do that because it's they don't like mucking in your eye if they don't have to. So they let the other eye heal on its own, which took about 9 or 10 months for it to completely clear out to the point that I could drive again. And then when I got home, I continued therapies, physical, occupational, and speech. And speech was not because I had speech problems, but speech covers all the cognitive issues that you have. So memory, organization, comprehension, vocabulary recall. I was not speaking as fast as I'm speaking right now. I couldn't find the right words, which still kind of hit me. It kind of hits me every now and then on a daily basis. But I went through different therapies, and then after a few months, I went to some group rehab therapies, both cognitive and psychotherapy, because there's a lot of effects that come with brain injury, again, whether it's a stroke or traumatic or whatever, things like depression, things like anxiety, things like aggression, lack of filter. Some people lose their social graces. If you've ever met someone who's had a stroke and has had that particular impact, if it's a frontal lobe injury, it can impact your regulation center. So some people say inappropriate things or do inappropriate things or things like that. The other big one that was a huge surprise for me was your initiation gets impacted chemically. So in that part of your brain and where your executive skills are stored, that also stores your get up and go, your ability to initiate, your ability to start something. And so I struggled for a really long time as to why this was happening to me, because I couldn't figure out why I wasn't back to the old Maria of doing 500 things and making things happen and being type A and being a control freak. And that was really what was going on. So those group therapies really helped with that. But it took about 6 or 7 months, which is actually quite fast given what had happened to me, but I slowly started to get back into work again and test the waters. The challenge with a brain injury like mine is because there's nothing physical that you see. I mean, if you break your arm or you break your foot, you know when it's healed, right? And you know there's a problem. But how do you know you're not as good at prioritization anymore until you have to prioritize? So I had to kind of get back into work just to sort of test the boundaries of what was happening to me. And over the course of the recovery that full year, as I was slowly getting back into work and doing client work again and making sure I wasn't screwing up my accounting books or anything like that. And then even the last few years, I deal with things differently. I've learned to adapt to what I call the new me, because I had to learn to adapt to things being different, and things that used to come easy for me don't come as easy for me. So my brain has to work harder. That also means that fatigue is a huge issue with brain injury patients and can sometimes last the whole rest of their lives. So I have to plan my weeks very carefully and my days, because if I try to do too much in one day, it literally exhausts me because my brain's working harder to do things that used to be a little bit more automatic than they are now. So I tell you all this because in whether it's a brain aneurysm or whether it's a divorce or a death or a medical diagnosis, we all have some major crisis at some point, unfortunately, that, like I mentioned before, yanks us out of our lives. And I was fortunate enough with my recovery that I was able to see what happened to me as a gift. I know there's a lot of other patients that I hear from that are not as fortunate as I am. But I did learn to reframe my life and reboot my brain, which is why I called the book Rebooting My Brain, because I was forced to, because I had to learn how to operate in a new way. And I learned some valuable lessons about what got me through that crisis that can apply to any crisis of you trying to get back on your feet again. So I'm going to share those with you and read a couple passages that illustrate those points. There's 3 major ones that as I was writing the book, I started to realize were important to getting back into your life again. And the first one is really all about patience. I am a redhead, and I'm also Italian. I'm 100% Italian. So patience is not something that I'm really well versed in. And sort of being a type A personality, I had always equated patience as a very negative thing. That maybe people didn't care enough if they were too patient, or they were just being lazy if they were trying to be patient and wait things out. And I was, pretty much smacked in the face that I had to learn to be patient, and I wasn't going to go back to normal 2 weeks later, which is what I was telling my doctors as I'm in the hospital, blind, with a shaved head, with tubes in my head, going, yeah, I'm going to get back to work in 5 weeks. I mean, they have all over my charts. They're like, she seems to not understand the severity of her injury. So I really had to learn that lesson, and I'm going to read a quick passage to you that exemplifies that, because my husband and I had this really great trip to Spain planned that happened right when this aneurysm hit. So obviously we didn't go. But I kind of couldn't let go of the fact that we weren't going to be going. So I'm just adapting this passage for you. During that crazy autumn in the hospital, I faced my first lesson with a teacher that came along and smacked me around quite often during recovery: patience. Paul and I had spent early 2008 planning a trip to northern Spain. Our plan was to jet off to Bilbao for a romantic 5-day road trip, heading south into the Rioja region to spend the night at a charming winery bodega, then cruising east into the Pyrenees for hiking in the mountains, and finally up to San Sebastian along the northern coast for 2 days of seaside fun. The trip was scheduled for September 10th, 2008, about 5 weeks after all hell broke loose. I, however, was convinced we were still going to get on that plane and fly halfway across the globe. Shaved, blind, frail, weak, underweight, fatigued, cognitively damaged, I still believed we were going to be sunning ourselves in Spain, munching on manchego and sipping Rioja. Mind you, Paul told me several times that he'd canceled the trip, but I kept forgetting. I constantly said, don't forget to ask the doctor if I can fly with the shunt in my head. Paul would sigh and have to tell me again and again, and watch me get angry again and again. But we have to go, I pleaded. It'll help me heal, I cajoled. We're really not going to be doing much walking. It'll be good for me, I reasoned. I wasn't even going to be released from the hospital until September 12th, but I still thought we were going. People who know the real me, who don't know the real me, the medical staff, for instance, thought this was merely my brain injury at play. Memory deficiencies, aggression, over-emotional outbursts, and it partly was. But I also have an insanely stubborn streak born of my Italian heritage and my status as a feisty redhead. Patience is just not in my vocabulary. I was forced to learn that life is not on my timeline. This brain injury was one glitch I was not going to be able to overcome with sheer determination and grit. This was serious business, and I had serious healing to do. For someone who was used to simply making up her mind and getting things done, how was I going to learn that I could not go from 0 to 100 or hospital bed to Spanish Beach in 60 seconds? Now, once again, I was put in my place when I tried to rally against something I could not control simply by willing it to be so. Most likely, this delusion that I can control everything, combined with my inability to surrender to things outside of that control, led to the damn aneurysm in the first place. I had to learn that this was more serious than I wanted to admit. Several psychologists noted in my chart that they were concerned I didn't fully appreciate the severity of my injury and that I was overestimating my current abilities and recovery time. Progress had to happen in small steps, not in giant leaps. I was going to have to set some goals, yet focus on the immediate step in front of me in order to make any progress. There had already been enough setbacks just while I was in the hospital, and there would be more when I left. But patience, a virtue with which I've always struggled, finally had me by the throat, and I was going to have to listen if I wanted to pick up my life again. It dawned on me that this was the beginning of reframing the way I live my life if I wanted to have a life to live. So the second lesson that really helped me get back on my feet was all about acceptance. And again, this is another word that I had kind of equated very negatively as compromise or not getting what you want. And I had to learn that there was a new me. I kept trying to get back to the old me and do things the way I used to do them before. And I was actually my own worst enemy for a really long time during this crisis because I kept thinking the game was the same and the game had changed, and I had to accept that in order to overcome it. So I'm going to read a quick passage to you about one of the lessons in that. When I was home and I was trying to start to get used to working again, I literally couldn't get up off the couch, and I couldn't understand why. I mean, I was still healing. I was still blind in one eye. It wasn't like I was completely healthy. But I couldn't understand, as I was mentioning, this lack of initiation. I couldn't understand why I just couldn't get myself down to my desk and at least check email for 10 minutes a day. So we brought a speech therapist back in to help kind of put me on a schedule and get me ready to get back to work again. And she really opened my eyes as to this fact that things were different now. And her name is Jane, so I'm just reading a quick passage about my work with her. It was like the sun burst into my cloudy day. I don't know if it was her education and experience with what was happening to me or her reassurance that what I was going through was normal given my brain injury, but it helped me get past trying to make sense of it all and just adapt. Acceptance. That lesson was key to getting me through the rest of my recovery. Before this, I had seen everything as so black and white. If I say I'm brain injured, I won't ever get back to my life, so I'll minimize the injury as much as possible and just push through. I had thought admitting to change meant I was broken. What I learned from Jane was that there was going to be a new me, not better or worse, but new. I could fight it all I wanted, but the sooner I accepted this new reality, the sooner I could adapt and deal with it. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It's seeing the reality in front of you and making the best out of the situation. To me, getting well had meant getting back to the old baseline again. Not true. It was now a new playing field. Getting healthy meant that I needed to honestly assess the obstacles and then see how far I could knock them over or how I could zip around them instead. Jane let some light into that darkness so I could realize it was not about the old me, it was about the here and now and making the new me work. Working with her rebooted my system and my approach to recovery. This turning point of asking for help completely rewired my thinking. And one of the things that you may have gotten with your book is a card for a free trial from a website called Lumosity. It's a brain games website developed by a bunch of neuroscientists. It's actually based in the Bay Area. And Jane actually turned me on to that website. And playing those games, it has been shown, their finding, to help improve brain injury patients and stroke patients as well. So I played those games for several weeks, and actually it helped me get my vocabulary back. It helped me get my cognitive edge back, and it helped me with recall as well as things like visual spatial recognition, which I was having problems with. So it's a really great website, and you have a card there for a 1-month free trial if you want to check it out. So the third lesson, which is I think a really important one, no matter what challenge we're facing, is to find the humor. So you might think, okay, this is, a near fatal brain aneurysm. There's nothing really funny about that. But my family and friends, true to form, found moments of humor to lighten their stress and lighten their mood and just cope. It's a human reaction, and people shouldn't feel guilty about making off-color jokes. I mean, my husband and I, between us, we joke a lot about brain injury and things like that. And sometimes we do it in front of other people and they're like kind of shocked. But that's how we deal with it. So, it's okay to let go and find the humor in things. I think it really helps people deflate the pressure and be able to problem solve and think more clearly. So there was actually a lot to laugh about, even though I don't remember the entire month of August 2008. My friend, who's a writer, who happened to be in town in Seattle the weekend that this happened and extended her stay, she started a journal for me where she documented everything that was going on in ICU. And a few other people chimed in with entries, but she noted all these humorous moments, even though they didn't know if these were things that were going to last me the rest of my life or, but I was, because of the drugs and because of the brain injury and because of being in ICU, a common side effect is called ICU psychosis. And I don't know if any of you have actually had friends or family in the ICU, but often people will come up with conspiracy theories. They'll get paranoid. They'll think they're late for meetings they never had. They think there's things they need to be doing that it's not true. They just start making things up. And so some of these stories I was saying were actually pretty funny, and she documented some of them, hoping that one day we'd be able to laugh about it, which we do. But my husband in particular, obviously you can guess he was under a lot of stress. And he found his own way of humorously dealing with the situation, among other things. So I'm going to read you this quick passage. As the days passed, medical staff did daily neurological assessments, sometimes multiple times a day. They asked me a series of questions to see where I was from a cognitive standpoint. While I could have conversations when I was alert and awake, I still didn't always have a firm grasp on reality. But I think my friends and family enjoyed the barrage of questioning more than I did, especially my friend Tracy, who wrote, "They started a lot of testing and assessment for future therapy. Lots more questions followed, the first being, does a cork float? I wasn't sure on this either. We just drink the wine. We don't bother putting the cork in water." Over the course of my hospital stay, Paul, along with everyone else, turned to humor as a coping mechanism. He invented his own battery of memory tests. That fall, two prominent men made headlines, John Edwards and Brett Favre. John Edwards' scandal involved a secret affair. Brett Favre, the famous Green Bay Packers quarterback, went to play for the New York Jets. As I'm a big football fan, this bit of news mattered to me because I loved Brett Favre and I'm a Jets fan. Each day, Paul asked me, "Do you remember what I told you about John Edwards? Do you remember what I told you about Brett Favre?" And each day, I forgot. You know that movie 50 First Dates with Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler, where each day he has to woo his girlfriend all over again because she suffers from no short-term memory? Yeah, it was kind of like that. "Shut up, no way!" I would exclaim in shock every single time. "Never gets old," he joked. But Paul's amusement masked a nagging worry that I might be like this for the rest of my life. In the vast blackness of a month entirely lost to memory, I know there were glimpses of the old Maria that offered hope and comfort to everyone, just as much as there were some scary setbacks. Even in my ramblings, I itched to be busy, telling people the location of things that I thought I needed from home. I didn't. Or asking what I needed to be doing. Nothing. My mind reeled off an ambitious to-do list on autopilot, even though none existed. Not all of it made sense, but everyone took it as a good sign that I wanted to be kicking ass and taking names again, especially Carrie, who wrote, August 9th, 2008. "We're trying to sort out a good pillow bed position because of your neck pain, so you're getting jostled quite a bit. During one of the jostles, your gown slipped a bit, and you said very distinctively to the nurse, 'Well, shit,' and yanked it back up. Little victories, tiny friend, little victories." So I share those lessons with you about patience, acceptance, and humor, again, because I'm hoping that you don't have to have a brain aneurysm to be able to find opportunities in your everyday adversities to reframe the conversation. I was forced to because of what had happened to me. And like I said earlier, I'm fortunate enough to see this as a gift because of my amazing recovery. But a lot of these changes I'm really glad that I've made in terms of slowing down and appreciating the moment a little bit more and trying to control my stress level. Because of that other aneurysm that I have that I mentioned, I do have to keep my blood pressure in check so that it doesn't get any bigger. But, and I'm not perfect. I haven't reached some Zen Buddhist state about my life, and I still get caught up in things. I still work with crazy clients and doing all sorts of stuff like that. But I try to stay a little bit centered and a little bit present, realizing that there are worse things that could be happening to me right now. So I just want to leave you with one last passage, which is kind of about a lot of thinking that I did because of the changes that happened to me. Again, it wasn't like I became a completely different person overnight, but there are a lot of personality and emotional changes that happen to brain injury patients. And so it kind of led me on this question of, do our brains define who we are? I've been asked, do you think your brain defines who you are? Interesting question. I've learned that our brain function is responsible for not just our physical being, but how we plan, whether we're organized or not, how much initiative we have, and whether we get angry, sad, happy, or hopeful. It conducts each instrument that makes up the grand orchestra of who we are. He's a go-getter. She's a neat freak. She's good with numbers. He's such a spontaneous guy. All of these personality types and traits that define us as human beings can be impacted by damage to our brains. If that happens, then who are we? Does brain function dictate your personality? Or if you believe personality is a part of your soul, then does that come first? And if it does come first, does it dictate the way your brain learns to operate? I strongly believe that your brain function impacts your personality, but it doesn't have to define who you are. My cognitive deficits and emotional changes threaten to change my very core, leaving paralyzing fear, sadness, and frustration in their wake. But the ability to fight through them, to keep trying to find a way around them, to deal with the tears by trying to find something to laugh at, that's all a very real part of who I was before the injury. These days, I realize that this desire to keep moving forward, to keep pushing through, is what makes me who I am, pre or post brain injury. As a result, the success or failure of the attempt doesn't really matter. My hope is twofold. First, that people take brain injury more seriously and understand what its effects can be on those they know and love. And second, that it doesn't take a brain aneurysm for people to learn the lessons I learned about slowing down, finding the humor, having more patience, and savoring each activity in our 24/7 connected world. Everyday challenges can present a new opportunity to reboot, start over, and reframe the conversation with your work, your relationships, and with yourself. It's not easy, and like me, you won't be great at it every single day. But again, it's the attempt that matters the most, not the outcome. So I just want to leave you with a quote that I've found that kind of has given me comfort through this journey, and I'm going to paraphrase because short-term memory, I can't seem to remember the exact quote. But, and then we're going to take some questions if you guys have questions about brain injury or writing the book or anything like that. But there's a quote that I found that said something to the effect of, life's challenges are not meant to paralyze you. They're supposed to show you who you are. And I really believe that. I really believe that it's when we're tested, and I know that sounds trite, but that's when the real you comes out, brain injury or not. And the real people of the real hearts of those around you come out as well. So I was very fortunate to have a really supportive community of friends and family that flew in from all over the country to be with me. But I know that there's a lot of brain injury patients who are abandoned by their families. Their families don't understand the personality changes or the psychological changes that are taking place. And it's those people, many of whom I met in my rehab group, that are the reason that I wrote this book, because more people need to understand what these effects of brain injury are, again, even if a person looks fine. So thanks for your time, and I will take any questions if you guys have any. I'm pretty open, so you can ask me anything. Thanks. I'm sorry? I will, for sure. Yes?
Do you think if this, would you say you're a happier person now with all these
So the question was, do I think I'm a happier person now than I was before because of all the things that I've learned? I have to admit I was pretty happy before, but I think I'm just more aware, and so it's made my life a little bit more richer. I think I was always just sort of going on the treadmill and not really realizing why I was going before. I was just always looking for the next job opportunity, the next career advancement, the next activity I could participate in, and I wasn't really stopping long enough to consider why. And so now, because I have to be more thoughtful about my day and my schedule and the things that I choose to volunteer for or get dragged into or whatever you want to call it, I think it's just, I feel like I'm living with a little bit more intention. Again, not every day, but I'm not some yogi on the mat. But so I guess in that respect, I'm a little bit more present in my life now than I was before, which before I probably would have said was a bunch of psychobabble, but now I kind of get it now. So thanks. Any other questions you guys have about brain injury or anything like that? So the question is, how have things been like using this platform of education and inspiration of the book? Is that kind of a good summary? Okay. It's actually been really great. I still have my consultancy and my branding business, but I feel like this has kind of opened up a whole nother avenue for me. I'm actually going to be speaking at a lot more medical conferences representing the patient point of view, not just about brain injury, but just about patient care in general. And I took this as an opportunity to go volunteer at the hospital that saved my life when I was still in Seattle. I became a patient advisor on the Family and Education Committee. And basically, I was the voice of reality when they were trying to think up new programs and new training modules. I was sort of like, yeah, that's too complicated, or yeah, they're not going to be looking at that. So I've used that as an opportunity to be able to educate about brain injury, but I just don't think, I think like everybody else, I just wasn't really as aware, you know, and I grew up in a house where in high school, my great aunt had suffered a stroke and she was living with us. My mother was taking care of her and I had no idea what was going on with her. I had no idea at 14, you know, why she had become a different person. And I don't know if she actually was aware, as aware as I am of what was happening to her, but you just hear the same stories over and over. And like I said, I keep getting these emails and it doesn't really matter what the injury is. People are like, oh my God, I read your book and I didn't have a brain aneurysm, but everything you described was like my story. And so just really understanding these effects, because I alluded to the fact about people in my group rehab. You know, I remember one guy in particular, which was so sad. His wife was divorcing him because she couldn't understand why he was lazy now and couldn't get his act together and was having such a hard time just getting back into his life and getting back to work after I think it was a car accident. And I remember when he finally was educated about these are the common effects of brain injury, and he sort of went down the list and went, yep. He's like, I'm going to take this binder home and show it to my wife because she thinks I'm making all this up, which is just really sad to me because, you know, I imagine it's got to be very hard to live with that. I know it's been challenging for my husband at times, but you know, at least he was willing to understand and educate himself, and I was very fortunate about that. But, you know, when we talk about like the concussions like that happened to Alex Smith and whatever, I'm so glad those guys are getting pulled out of the game, because right around the time that I had my brain aneurysm, there was a high schooler in Seattle named Zach Leisted. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of him, but he got a concussion during a game and was put back in, or during practice, I can't remember. And he collapsed on the field and was taken to actually the same place that I was taken to, the same trauma center. He's just learning to walk again, and this was 4 years ago. So, you know, again, the diagnosis is not how many fingers am I holding up and do you know your name, you know, because I was able to answer those questions, but I had, you know, I don't even remember answering those questions. So I'm really happy to see that awareness is building up with people taking brain injury more seriously, that sometimes the effects can't be seen. But we need to be just really careful when we fall or get in a car accident or take a hit by the end zone. We really need to be more cognizant of that. Sorry, got on my soapbox there. Any other questions? Do any of you guys have brain injury or stroke in your family, or know anyone that is brain injured? Is it a stroke or an accident? So okay, so those are called traumatic brain injuries, versus what I had is called an acquired brain injury because it happened organically. But that's the thing with concussion, is that TBIs can cause aneurysms to form. And so going back to the football thing, that's why if they do have a concussion, it can cause a future brain aneurysm. So yeah, I don't know if any of this resonates for you, but with this person's behavior, but maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, my mother-in-law actually had a aneurysm that ruptured like 7 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she was.
Did she survive?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good.
But it was similar. A lot of things you're talking about. Again, like a lot of strokes that like she collapsed in the bathroom too. And,
Everybody's in the bathroom. I don't know why. It's weird. At least they're not on the road.
Sister-in-law was there, and it was literally one of those things like she was showering, and then like right, sister-in-law was like, she was in the shower for like 40 minutes. She went up and checked on her, and she
Oh my gosh.
she called the ambulance, and she went and had emergency surgery, and
Wow.
all right. And then I don't know, it just makes me have a lot of respect for her recovery because she's doing amazingly too. It's just crazy to hear about everything that you're up against.
Yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing, which is I never really had a stance sort of about healthcare reform, but we were very fortunate. My husband was working for Microsoft, and they covered everything 100%, and our medical bills were well over $500,000. And I've talked to aneurysm groups who didn't even know about some of the rehab groups after, because since they didn't have insurance, they weren't going to be able to get into those rehab groups. And yes, the doctor saving your actual life is important, but what gets you back into society again as a productive member of society is the follow-up rehab. And that's where the care falls down, because a lot of insurance companies don't cover the rehab because they think it's a luxury, versus, hey, at least let the person take the full 8 weeks and then they can be back to work and back, being productive. So
Yeah, so she just retired, but she would like to.
that's good. Yeah.
She definitely has the take entirely. I mean,
Yeah.
my mom does too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like because I can't explain it anymore. It's not that like I can't do things I didn't do before necessarily. Like I used to be really, really good at project planning. Like I was queen of that. I organized an 80-city global roadshow in one of my technology jobs before. The thought of actually seeing a blank spreadsheet right now and organizing a project like that with multiple tabs just makes my head spin. I wouldn't even know. I get really overwhelmed. That's a big effect that hits a lot of brain injury patients. As I was mentioning, that filter gets damaged. And so in the book, I have an example of, it's sort of like the bouncer of my brain was really good before, and now he got replaced with someone who's brand new, and he just lets everything in at the same time. So like, for example, in this group, like we're completely focused and I can talk to you guys. If there was another meeting going on over there, it's hard for me to filter out what's going on. So things like that just require more effort. So I'd have to spend more effort trying to focus on this conversation. Like it hits me in restaurants all the time. And stroke victims and aneurysm patients always talk about this, that they have a really hard time with filtering out conversations in a restaurant because your brain's taking everything in with equal weight because your filter's broken. And so you're kind of like, and it leaves you exhausted, because if you can imagine taking everything in at the same time, you're chugging really hard to try to stay focused on the person that you're talking to, and that can exhaust you after an hour. So, no texting and talking for me. I try not to. Yes.
Unlike a report, unlike say like breaking a leg where it's obvious that you come up with strategies as you've been recovering to kind of share that you're in this recovery mode with people so they have.
That's a really good question, actually. So the question was, since there's a lot of unseen effects, did I come up with strategies to tell people that I might be struggling? Is that kind of where you're going with that? So it's just funny that you chose to use the word strategies, because that's the big word in rehab, is coming up with strategies to deal with your issues, and they use that word all the time. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of challenging for me at first because I didn't know how much of it to bring into my business. I don't want to be a brand consultant to, $30 million companies and say like, oh, I forget stuff sometimes, I mean, so I have found ways to sort of work around that. This sounds silly, but I write down a lot more than I used to. So I'm always taking notes, or I'm always recording, and like even today I have my notes. So I'm always writing stuff down, whereas before I didn't have to. So that's not necessarily something that people would notice, but often sometimes I'll ask the same question twice in one conversation because I've forgotten what the answer was. So it hasn't caused too much of an issue, and most of the partners that I work with on projects know about my situation, so I tend to rely on them. Like sort of like if we're having a conference call, I'll make sure I'm taking notes and somebody else is taking notes, so that if I missed something or I didn't understand something, they sort of have my back. But it hasn't been a situation where people have been mean about it. But I don't necessarily go like, hi, I want your business and I had a brain injury. Like, I don't lead with that. But if they go to my website, they'll know that I'm an author and that I've written this book. And ironically, bringing that into my brand as a business has actually really helped my business, because it differentiates me in a weird way, but they also just see this story of overcoming adversity and they feel like, well, that's kind of a person that I want to work with, which I was surprised. I wasn't sure how people were going to respond to that. But there's only been I joke with my husband, I call it playing the brain injury card, about if something goes wrong, and I've never not delivered something for a client and blamed it on my brain injury or anything like that. But there have been a couple things that literally is because of my overwhelm problem or whatever, and I've just sort of found a way to deal with it. I double check everything. I turn off my email while I'm trying to work on something with people. So those are the kinds of strategies that I've tried to employ. But yeah, there's only been like 1 or 2 times where I've told somebody, you have to slow down because I have to write this down because I had a brain injury. Because then that invites a whole bunch of other questions, right? It's like, oh, what's that? And when did that happen? And you're like, no, I'm just trying to get the information down right now. So good question, though. Thanks. Anyone else? No? Well, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the book.